Hello and welcome. We're the LorcanaTwins. I'm Aaron, or LorcanaTwin1, and this is my brother Wade, LorcanaTwin2, and we are here to talk to you about the latest tournament we competed in, and we're each going to go over the decks we played. I was able to pilot this Sapphire Steel list you see here to a 5-0-1 finish, which was enough to get me into first place at the end of the Swiss standings. And my brother played a Ruby Amethyst list that we will see a little bit later, and also did very respectable on that. So yeah, overall, what did you think of the tournament?
I thought it was a great event put on by Bunker Gaming in Minnesota. So it was very nice to have a tournament that was kind of local to us that we could travel to without, much fuss. And it was a great space that we played in. They had plenty of tables. Everyone was pretty friendly there, I thought. So, overall it was a nice event, and it was just fun to get out and play some paper games.
Yeah, and it was cool too because a group from our LGS that we go to all drove up. So we had about 6 of us there, and everyone did very respectably, and it was a lot of fun hanging out and actually, playing with the physical cards. I know we've done some online tournaments in the past, so it felt really good to be using the real deal for this. So without further ado, let's go over the Sapphire Steel list here. I was running 4 of the 1-drop Captain Hook. Just love that it can punch up for 3, and that's really strong for a 1-drop. And then it also synergizes well with the next card, 4 copies of Smee. I remember getting really excited seeing the Smee card revealed during reveal season for Into The Inklands. Just currently at a 2-drop spot, it's one of the strongest, well-statted units in the game at 3 strength and 3 willpower. And on top of that, it also has 2 lore. And, they think it might have, somewhat of a little negative effect that it loses a health when it's exerted if you don't have a captain in play, but that's really no big deal. I mean, he's got 3 willpower, and a lot of times what I found against Ruby Amethyst, let's say, is you feel pretty good questing with him, because if they don't have a snake on board, I mean, at best, they might either, use a crab to buff something, or they'll run in a fox, and in the case of the fox, that you really don't want to be trading your 3-drop fox for a 2-drop Smee, so it feels pretty good to be able to, quest away with him, and also just leave him standing as a threat to deal with whatever your opponent's putting down, because I know in traditional ramp decks in the past, sometimes it feels like your early game's kind of weak, and by the time you start getting units on the board that can contest what the opponent's doing, maybe, it's a little too far gone at that point. But here you can open with a Captain Hook into a Smee, especially going second. That feels really nice. And then just let them play defense while you ramp up with the rest of your cards.
Yeah, another thing that's kind of nice about him too is just he's got 2 lore at such a cheap cost of 2. Mm-hmm. So even in the late game, where sometimes a lot of decks are only dropping like 1 big card a turn, you can fit Smee in alongside something else and like really push a lot of lore once you've kind of taken over control of the board. So yeah, he's just a nice thing to slot in. And also in this deck, you don't have trouble getting to a lot of ink. And so if you wheel a new hand, and he's kind of fun to drop alongside some other threats.
And another cool interaction that comes up, more than you might think, is when you have Smee and Cogsworth in play, and when you quest with Smee, even if you don't have a captain, the Cogsworth prevents Smee from dealing 1 damage to himself. So that's really neat there. And then Mickey Mouse, great for ramping. I was only running a couple copies, but I do think it's really important to hit that ramp on turn 3, whether it's with Mickey or ideally the Fishbone Quill. So, and again, it can be matchup dependent. Like sometimes if you're against a discard deck, it's really nice to play the Mickey. So, it's 1 less card coming out of your hand, whereas with the Quill, you're inking an extra card out of your hand. So sometimes, depending on the matchup, you might want to opt for one over the other. But generally, I would say the Fishbone Quill is really the ideal turn 3 play, because then it lets you ramp every turn thereafter too. And especially when you're using a whole new world to grab a new hand, it just lets you keep inking 2 things a turn and pulling way ahead of your opponent, which is what you want to be doing, getting way more ink than them, so you can start playing 2 or 3 cards a turn to their only 1 or 2 and pulling ahead that way. So then we have Hiram Flaversham, very big for the draw power in this game. Absolutely love this card, especially in conjunction with the Popsicle. Even your Fishbone Quills are good with that. He just draws you 2 cards on play and on quest if you banish an item. So that's a really powerful draw there. And I will say, a lot of times you have the whole new world in this deck that you can fall back on to refill your entire hand, but sometimes your opponent dumps their whole hand or most of it, kind of anticipating that you're going to play a whole new world and give them a new hand. And a lot of times in this deck, like, there's just so much other draw potential that if you can just keep drawing and filling your own hand but starving them out and denying them that whole new world that they might have thought was coming, that can sometimes be the optimal play. So really, really fun to see when your card draw is lining up well. And then one of the MVPs of the deck up next, Cogsworth, played at the full 4 count. He's got 2 lore, 5 willpower, and of course Ward is very important on him. It was, really impactful against people trying to use Prince Eric to banish things. They couldn't pick him as a target, or using Madame Medusa, they could not pick Cogsworth as well as a target, so that was great. And then, of course, the fact that he gives resist to all of your other characters, that was really huge, because there's a lot of steel in the meta right now, and so he just shuts down a lot of their damage, and that definitely sticking him on 5 also makes you feel like you're going to be guaranteed to get that whole new world off if you want, since they can't really remove the Cogsworth till the next turn. And so yeah, just a huge absolute beast in this deck. Love the Cogsworth. And then speaking of a beast, Beast is up next at a full 4 count, the legendary Beast, which he finds his way into almost every steel deck, it seems, and understandably so. He's got the 2 lore for a cost of 5, and then his effect, though, if he's undamaged when your turn starts, you get to draw an extra card. So just yet another way to draw cards in this deck. Keep this cycle going, and once you've ramped to big numbers, when you're drawing into some of these powerful options, that just really helps you get there. And then Gaston, he was a powerhouse as well. The 3 lore is huge, and he's uninkable, but it's not so much of a problem in this deck when we easily can ramp to that 6 spot. And then his effect was really huge, because sometimes, maybe you are running low on cards and you don't have the exact answers you need, or the gas to keep your hand refilled. And then his ability to let you on play, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and then find whatever option in there that you need at the moment, is just really helpful. And even if you don't find a good option, like, at least that's getting 3 cards off the top of your deck that you didn't need to draw, so that hopefully the rest of your draw power can get you there. So very huge card there. And just keeping in line with Gaston is the Robin Hood, also at the 6 cost. But I thought I'd throw in a couple of him, because this one is inkable. Would be a potential way to deal with evasives as well, and also develops a 2 lore threat. And if you've been dumping your hand to a Fishbone Quill, then he might also draw you a card. So very cool.
Another nice thing to point out about Gaston and Robin Hood is their 4 strength.
Mm-hmm.
A popular card in Ruby right now is Madame Medusa, and
Absolutely.
She likes to target those 3 strength and less characters. So like even the Beast is very susceptible to that. It's lucky for Cogsworth that he has Ward. That really saves him. But Gaston and Robin Hood are not targets for Medusa. So that makes them actually really strong and annoying for a Ruby Amethyst player to deal with.
So yeah, they were pivotal against that. And then we get into Tinkerbell, also with 4 strength, so that's nice there. 6 cost, the 2 lore. And of course, her effect is when she comes into play, she deals 1 damage to all enemy units. And then also, if she gets a challenge and banished, then she can do 2 more to another unit of your choice. And that came in big too during the tournament, just cleaning up boards. Sometimes because you're ramping and not playing the best statted things up front, if you don't have your Captain Hook or your Smee or whatever, you can fall behind on board a little bit, but just having her in play really helps clean that up. And then also, like, a lot of these cards, once you hit that 5-drop slot, and even Hiram, you can start to sing a lot of your removal spells, like Along Came Zeus, for example, which we'll get to in a little bit here. But just their high cost lets them sing a lot of things and do more with your ink than you otherwise would be able to.
Now, it looks like you played 1 spicy copy of the Grandma. So would you care to elaborate on that decision?
Well, I had 1 extra slot in the deck, and I thought it'd be nice to have a potentially different win con to maybe close the game out quick if there was ever like a really tight game. And I know this deck draws a lot, and a lot of times I'd end up drawing her right away, and then I'd just ink her because it's way too early and I wasn't entertaining that. But she does have a great stat line, again, with that 4 HP, or the 8 willpower, and 4 strength. So it also gets around the Medusa card that is pretty rampant in the meta. 2 lore of her own, plus on top of that, any lore you might get from inking cards, which just tends to happen. I feel like every turn you kind of want to be inking with this deck, unless you've gotten like trying to preserve some of the cards in your hand toward the late game. But yeah, it just seemed like if you have a Fishbone Quill down or 2, or you draw a Mickey late game, like, probably doesn't feel as good. But if you have her in play, then it's like, oh sure, that's an extra lore. So I think just the potential to close the game a little quicker than the opponent might be expecting, because sometimes you might have 14 ink and you can easily just drop her and ink a couple things, and then surprise them. It's not like you have to have her in play from before and hope she survives the turn to start getting lore out of her. So just a different option to close the game, and she's inkable, so if it's not going to be relevant, you can just ink her. And then Hades had a copy of 2. I really liked Hades ever since set 1. I think it's just one of the most enticing reasons for me to want to play Sapphire. Really cool character, the art's amazing, and just the effect. I love when you can put a character on board and it threatens 2 lore of its own, but then also removes an opponent's character. It's kind of like doing a couple of things at once. So other cards like that, like Medusa and Lady Tremaine, have been really popular and successful, and I feel like this is Sapphire's version. And I definitely thought, too, there's certain characters where if you're only relying on the steel damage to clear, like let's say the Cinderella Stout-Hearted is a big one, or maybe Hercules, the shifted version, like anything with a lot of resist, like that can be tough if you're only banking on the steel damage. And even if your opponent's just playing Cogsworth and giving all the other characters resist, like it can kind of throw off some of the math and numbers. So I really thought being able to just point and click remove something of the opponents would be nice with Hades.
Yeah, I think that's what makes steel and blue such a powerful combination, because you already have the steel damage, which is a lot of removal in and of itself. But if you're ahead on board and then anything they try to put down to counter you, as long as it doesn't have ward, Hades can just come in and get rid of it right away and just continue to develop your own board while you're removing your opponents. That can be very frustrating to be on the other side of. So I think Hades has always been strong, and I really think people should probably play him a little bit more than he's been used currently.
Absolutely. And the next card, Develop Your Brain, is a great action card. Usually this lets you dig a little further into your deck. You get to see the top 2 cards of your deck and pick one to add to your hand. And early game, if you're lacking the ramp for turn 3, you can play this on 1, let's say, and try to find a Fishbone Quill or a Mickey Mouse. That's really good. Otherwise, if you see that you maybe have a Captain Hook that you might play, you could hold off on the hook, put that down on turn 2 while you also play this, since it replaces itself. And that's just a way where you're still developing the board a little, but you're using that extra ink if you miss your Smee to try to make sure you have that ramp card on turn 3. And then if you fail that too, maybe you had a Popsicle in hand and you could at least try to find a Hiram or something that's going to get the deck's engine really running smooth. And then in the late game, it's just really nice if you need a certain answer. You can just see, what does the top 2 of my deck have? And that's just a way to more quickly get to the cards you really want. So it's a very good card. And then Rise of the Titans. Now this is a new one from Into the Inklands. And I wondered, it seemed like a strong card when I first saw this revealed. Then, didn't know how much play it would see, but testing on the ladder, I started to see a lot of Ruby Amethyst decks running locations. And it did seem like this deck could struggle against them if you don't have a good board established. And even if you do, you have to sink a lot of resources or a lot of challenges out of your characters into those locations, which just slows down your questing and whatever else. Then it opens up your characters to be challenged, and whether or not that's something you want to be doing in that moment, can't really avoid it. But this Rise of the Titans just allows you to banish any location for 3 ink, which just seems really great. And especially like the McDuck Mansion, which I know some other blue steel decks have been playing, like that's 9 willpower. That is a lot of willpower to try to get through. So to be able to just have an inkable 3-cost card that can just banish it on sight is really nice. It also can banish items too. That didn't come into play so much for me during the tournament. I don't think I ever casted it that way. But it's nice to know the options there if there's ever an item that's really giving you trouble on the opponent's side of the table. And then 3 copies of Smash. Now this card, I was testing it on the ladder, and I thought at times it felt really good, but most of the time, it feels a little reactionary, and it's not a song. You can't sing it, so you do have to devote that full 3 ink. And I know there was one turn where the opponent shifted up into the new Robin Hood on turn 3, and they went first. And luckily I had a Smee on board, and since they quested, I could trade Smee and Smash into the Robin Hood just to shut down any 5-cost song singing shenanigans going forward. But it's still like, it's not developing your board any further, but it can shut down like anything in a really important spot. Like especially it was included in there for the new legendary Ursula and Emerald,
which is kind of funny because you didn't play against any Emerald decks all day.
I was so surprised. Like I thought I'd be seeing a lot of Emerald decks, but I didn't personally have to play.
I think I saw all of those because I was against 4 Emerald Steel throughout the day, and it's very fun being against that Ursula. I can tell you. So.
But yeah, that smash. Now, had she hit the table, it would have been there, hopefully in hand to deal with her before she could get some good singing off. Because I know if she sings like Friends on the Other Side and draws 4 cards, or maybe Let the Storm Rage On and draws 2 and does 4 damage, like it's just a lot of tempo and value that the opponent would get. So that was basically, I wanted this deck to have a chance to, counteract her before she could do her singing magic. So anyway, then we have, and then along came Zeus, which is included here as a 2 of. I think this card's really good, and I could see bumping it up as well. I just wanted to keep the unequal counts, a little bit lower, but just the ability to deal 5 damage was really clutch.
So many key characters that this can get rid of.
Yeah, the number of times I was able to remove like the Steel Beast, or a big Tinkerbell, or like a Maui even against Ruby Amethyst, or plenty of other things with 5 willpower. It's really a great card, and the ability that you can even sing it with Hiram Flaversham or Cogsworth or Beast or anyone more expensive than that to play. Just really good. And then
when paired with Tinkerbell too, it clears any of the 6 health units, and there's a lot of Robin Hood going around right now, and he's got that 6 willpower.
And it's also another way to deal 5 damage to a location, which also could be pretty good against Ruby Amethyst decks or any other decks playing locations. So just the flexibility of it as well was very nice. And then Whole New World, because that's the best card in the game for refilling your hand, and the ability to just sing that with a 5-drop or higher, and then use all your ink that you've ramped up to just keep playing more and more units. Especially if you shut the opponent's board down and then you do that and you just keep developing wider and wider, like that's just really strong and hard for them to come back from, unless they're, let's say, playing Ruby Amethyst and you have Be Prepared. That is one thing this deck didn't really get in set 3 as a way to prevent a Be Prepared, let's say, whereas Amber got Bare Necessities that can seal Be Prepared out of the hand, and the new Emerald cards like the Ursula that seals the song from hand.
But
so
I think
still
what
have
this,
to be wary of it. But
I think what this deck has going for it is it can actually outdraw Ruby Amethyst a lot.
Yep.
There's so many ways to keep the card draw flowing, and if you continue to put down 2 or 3 threats a turn that they have to answer with a Be Prepared, if you're in a good position on board, then you can kind of force those out of them and then continue to drop threats and Hirams and draw more with that. And so you can really actually win kind of the war of attrition as long as you're keeping a good board presence. And I think that's what makes this really strong too, is the ability to just kind of outdraw Ruby Amethyst sometimes, and kind of run them out of resources.
Yeah, I felt like there were a lot of times where maybe you're able to play a Gaston, and then Gaston finds another Gaston, and then maybe you play both, or maybe you just drop a Smee in there next to the first Gaston, not overcommitting. And then if you do get Be Prepared, well then it's like, hey, okay, I'll play my second Gaston, and I just found a Robin Hood, like that'll drop me a card too, so then play that. And it's like, just keep developing 2 lore threats or higher, and just eventually whittling it down. It was very grindy, long matches against Ruby Amethyst, but it did show it could go the distance, so that was really nice to see. Lastly, on the bottom row there, we have 3 copies of Grab Your Sword. This did come in clutch in a lot of matches, but again, it seems like you could do 4, but it's just another uninkable that's kind of high costed if you don't have a singer on board. And if you don't have a quill to quill it away, if you have no other way to get it out of your hand and no relevant targets on the enemy side, keeping it at 3, it felt sufficient. So yeah, I liked it at a 3. And then Popsicle, definitely important for the draw, just replaces itself and gives your Hiram a nice target for a banish item later on. And you can also use the heal effect of it if that ever comes into play, if you want to keep some of your units outside of the range of just different spells your opponent might have, or might buff it outside the range of a trade with an opponent's character you can see on board. So it's very versatile, and that's where I think this deck really excels. And then lastly, the Fishbone Quill, which is super big for the ability to ramp in this deck. And yeah, overall, I think it was a very fun list to play and a very consistent list. It felt like I had a chance to do well against any deck, and that it could really find the answers it needed in any given moment. And I know there are probably some matchups that are definitely, less favored than others, but overall I think it has a very good chance against any deck. And I'll just say I faced 3 Ruby Amethysts in the first 5 rounds, and then I also faced an Amber Steel bodyguard deck that was very explosive and took a game off me really quickly. I was just barely able to scrape out the next 2 rounds of that one. And then other than that, I was in round 5 against a Jafar deck, and that was very challenging. I did get the first game pretty decently, but then the second game they had 2 of the big Jafar on board, and they were already at 7 lore, so I knew if you have Whole New World in hand, like you win this one, it's over. But they did not have it, and I was able to claw my way back from that too. So, but overall, that was a lot of fun. And then for round 6, it was an intentional draw because me and my opponent were both guaranteed to make top 8 if we drew. And even if we didn't draw, we were guaranteed top 8. So we just decided to just draw. And then the top 8, I was really excited to keep playing. I kind of hoped we would keep playing, but it was getting late, and everyone else was fine to split. So we all agreed to split and just, celebrate the fact that we top 8'd. So it was a lot of fun. And yeah, I think going forward, this is a list I would definitely consider playing more of. I think it's gotten a lot popular, this color pairing anyway, over the last week, and I'm sure the meta will adapt and evolve to it. I know Ruby Sapphire is becoming really popular, and this might struggle a little bit into that type of deck, so it'll be curious to see how the meta shakes out. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I would definitely recommend trying it out if you're interested. But now we're going to go talk about the deck you played, and that was a couple of completely different colors.
Yeah, so originally I was going to play Steel Sapphire as well, and then it was getting late, and I was still waffling on what to try, and I felt like I had more experience, I guess, on Ruby Amethyst from the end of set 2. It was something I had avoided playing for a long time, but towards the end of the season, I picked out that deck and did pretty well with it in one of the previous online Pixelborn tournaments. So I thought, since I haven't played much with set 3 yet, I'll give this version a try. So I ran 1 copy of Olaf and 2 copies of the 1-drop mini. That looks a little weird, but I like to mix and match, put in the different visuals just so I have something different to look at as I'm playing. And there was a time before where I played a deck with 1 more Olaf than my brother, and he played a deck with 1 more mini, and in that particular event, he did a little better than me there, so I tried to copy that. It didn't really work out. But then we had 3 copies of Rafiki. He's this really nice Amethyst's version now, kind of like the Captain Hook from Steel. A good 1-drop to get down, so you have an answer to, let's say someone bodyguards a Simba or something on 2. This will kind of force them off of that. They won't want to give you a free trade with Rafiki. The downside, of course, he has 0 strength when he is on defense, so you kind of have to just hold him back and wait to get some value with him most of the time. Then Cusco, I decided to run 4 Cusco on as in my 2-drop slot, because I personally really like to develop something on turn 2 without needing to pick it up with the snake. And I also like the card draw that he gets, because in some matchups, just having the option to draw more cards really helps you find what you need, and so I value that pretty highly. Madam M Snake, of course, is nice to get a 3/3 into play that can kind of stave off some early aggro. I played 2 copies of the Pinocchio Talkative Puppet. There had been a lot of talk that he's one of the very few answers that Ruby Amethyst has currently to try to deal with the 3-drop Ursula in Emerald, as well as some other threats that you like to get off the table, like a 3-cost dock. And even late game, he's nice to pair him with Maui, can stun something, and then Maui can run in and clear it out. So great for taking out Steel Beasts and other threats. Tinkerbell is another example, but so a couple of him just because it's nice. You need some answer in your deck that can give you a chance to fight back in certain matchups. So he's kind of what I went with there. Then 4 Madam M Fox, nice to just use as a way to pick up some of your value characters, replay them again, and then rush in with a 4-drop. 3 copies of Maleficent Sorceress to draw cards. And then Merlin, the crab, I had 2 copies of him. So he's very strong. I would definitely consider playing maybe a third copy as well. Just very helpful at clearing locations. I do feel like people play around him a lot when they exert things like, or sometimes they hold back in case you have a crab and can get a free trade. Like it's very fun trading a Cusco into something that has 4 willpower or less when they don't expect it to get the KO. But yeah, I do think people play around it pretty decently. I wanted this deck to have the ability to sometimes go aggressive as well, so I ran 3 copies of Minnie Mouse Surfer. I know a lot of people currently are debating whether or not to play her, think she might be kind of bad because of Maui's Fishhook, which can give things evasive and then easily deal with her. But I actually didn't run into any Ruby Amethyst matchups during my 6 games that I played. But what I did get against was 4 Emerald Steels, and I will say almost every single time that I played her, she got smashed the next turn, or she someone like let the Storm Rage on with her, and a lot of Ursula's casting it twice. So Minnie wasn't getting me as much value as I would have liked. And then, of course, in a location meta, she doesn't do much punching into locations. She's kind of a I'm going for the win type of card and doesn't really serve much else of a function. So, I think I could see cutting her going forward, but I also really do like the ability to play as the aggressor, and it does come in handy at times. Then Merlin, 3 copies of the GOAT. I do like that he's in there as a way to finish a game, but at the same time, if you see him early, he just doesn't really help with the game plan too much, so he's often inked in the early stages. Merlin Rabbit, I still think that's one of the best cards in Lorcana right now, especially if you're playing this type of a control deck that wants to see a lot of cards in hand. So once you get your Merlin down and start bouncing him around, you can just draw a bunch of cards, and that helps you go for the long game. Now Jim Hawkins, I did try 2 copies of him.
Exciting new set 3 card.
Yes, I've opened 2 of him so far, so I figured let's just try 2. And I paired him with 6 locations, 4 being the Queen's Castle, which I think is by far the best location that this deck can run, just because it is inkable. It has pretty strong willpower at 7, still has a nice 2 lore on it, and the ability to put your characters there and then draw a card for each one that's there. If you've controlled the board and then you've stacked a bunch of characters at this location, it makes it very hard for your opponent to come back into the game.
Yeah, and only with the move cost of 1, that's very low, and especially sometimes you're in a situation maybe you don't want to overcommit to the board in case it gets wiped, and if you have a few characters in play and you just spend a few ink moving them over there, that can feel really good, especially if you're able to draw off of them later.
Yeah, and I did really want to play a third copy of Jim, and I could even see going for it, but then there's times where you really need him and the location for this to be of value, and you don't want your hand to be basically gone after you do that. And it's also not always a great time to drop a location, and Jim on his own is not very impressive as a 5-drop with only a 4/4 stat line, and basically just quests for 2 at that point and doesn't really do anything once he's entered play. So you definitely have to know when to play him and when to ink him, and but he was in there for a very specific purpose, which I will get to just a little bit later. Then I ran 3 copies of Maui, and I really didn't run into any location decks. I know in the past too, I usually ran Maui at a 3 because there are times, like even in a Ruby Amethyst matchup, where you're trying to push for the win, and if you're top decking these loreless characters and they're not presenting you any targets to trade out with, people are just wiping the board or dropping targeted removal, then he always felt a little less satisfying to me. I know in this location meta though, it's very important to have ways to swing for big strength, and Maui definitely has that, especially if you pair him with the fish hook. Once the fish hook's down, Maui can rush in and do 9 damage. So against the deck my brother played, this would be helpful. Well, actually he didn't run any of the McDuck's Mansion, but there are a lot of people trying that card, and Maui can clear that in one hit with the fish hook. So definitely I would play 4 Maui if I was running the fish hook, and I think going forward I probably would run 1 or 2 copies of the hook and probably a 4 set of Maui. But it really didn't have an impact in any of my games. I wasn't playing against any location decks. Madame Medusa, then I ran 3 copies of her. She does have a lot of value in taking out targets
sure.
with 3 strength or less, and there's many valuable things you can get off the table with her. I do kind of miss the Tremaine because there were a couple games where I was playing against Cogsworth decks where they only had one thing in play, and I'm sitting on Medusa, and I did think, Tremaine would pretty much seal this game for me. So as it is, Medusa, and she doesn't quest as hard as Tremaine does. She's only got that one lore. Her 4/4 stat line is pretty decent. Will trade with a decent number of things. So she has her upsides and her downsides as well. Personally, I think going forward, I'd like to try a mix of both of them, just so that you have a little bit more flexibility. But as I do think people are playing around Tremaine less, just since people aren't using it as much. But Medusa is still very powerful in this meta. Then I ran 3 copies of Ursula, which I was a bit scared to do because she is expensive, and her 2 strength, I thought that made her a target, for enemy Medusas. Kit Cloud Kicker could just kick her off the table, and that did happen to me a couple times. And while that might not be horrible all the time to be able to play this again, like if you spent your whole turn dropping a 7-drop, it's because you probably really want that to stick and either quest for 3 lore or sing Be Prepared with it on the following turn. So there were a couple games where that slowed me down in a way that I didn't necessarily appreciate. But, overall, I think she brings a lot of value in the ability to get some lore away from your opponent while drawing you a card, and just you continue to see options once you get to your Ursula point of the game. 4 friends on the other side, pretty standard there. It is a little interesting, if you're used to playing on Pixelborn a lot, it's nice being able to see what you're going up against when the game starts. But in this, when you're in person, you don't have any of that information. So I wasn't expecting to be against as much green steel as I ended up being against. And so oftentimes turn 2, like I keep my friends on the other side because it just helps you keep a good hand, in most matchups. But a couple of my matches, turn 2, Ursula comes down, rips a song from my hand. They seem to always take that one right away. So towards the later parts of the tournament, I started just getting rid of those or inking them right away, to try to avoid that, especially once you've played the first game and know what you're against. But always a good card. Be Prepared, of course. You kind of need that in this deck because it's playing a lot of control minions, but they don't really get you much lore, and it's more reactionary in the early phases of the game as you try to keep the board clear. But eventually, once your opponent has about exhausted their resources, it's good to wipe the board and start over. And so my game plan here was kind of to get Ursula in play, try to sing Be Prepared, and then drop a location and maybe Jim plus another location, and really create like this awful situation for the opponent to deal with that could quickly, get me to 20 lore at the end of the game. And so there were a couple times I was able to do that, and it felt very strong. And even like if you were tempoing out nicely and going first, playing Jim on 5 and getting a location at the same time can really put the pressure on your opponent. So all in all, I think this deck is pretty similar to what it was before, but it maybe plays a bit more slowly now than it did. I think in set 2 you could really play this more aggro style with curving out nicely into mini, maybe into the Peter Pan's Shadow, and just developing all this lore. And sometimes you could actually be almost playing aggro even though you're playing a control deck. And this time around, I think a lot of the early game characters are pretty slow in the lore aspect, and so it definitely felt more grindy. And so my record for this event, I had 3 wins, I had 1 loss and 2 draws. And the draws, like honestly, some of the games that we played took like 25 minutes, and it was just like in paper, it's definitely a bit slower. And I was trying to be quite efficient with my plays, but even then, it just some of these got really grindy, and a lot of the whole New World decks, you're going through your whole hand, and then they get a new one, and you repeat the process and do that several times. So some of these matches, like I was really close at the end of one. I had 19 points. I had 2 locations on board and some characters as well. And the opponent didn't have anything, but unfortunately, their turn was the last turn of, the tiebreaker rounds. And so even though I would just win on the next turn, because of the rules of the tournament, you have to take the draw. And, so I think going forward, just like one thing for me will be to make sure that I'm also being as efficient as I possibly can, just to try to minimize draws. And also you can play more aggressive style decks too that that play more efficiently, because I do think this version of Ruby Amethyst plays slower than than season 2, I guess, set 2. And so, it's something to keep in mind if you're needing to win, a couple, 2 or 3 games, or play 2 or 3 games in a round and try to fit that in 50 minutes.
Yeah, and it's interesting to try to think of, like, if you were going to enter with an aggressive type of a deck, with all the steel flying around in the meta, just what would be the optimal aggressive deck that doesn't just, fall over to all the steel decks out there. But I was really pleased with the Sapphire Steel, how that went. And I know another person that went to the Ghost Star LGS was able to place second in the standings with the Ruby Amethyst list. So big shout out to him. And
yeah,
he seems to love the deck, and it's definitely a top tier deck. It might not be as dominant as it was in set 2, although maybe it will be, who knows. It's certainly toward the top of the meta right now, so it definitely has potential.
Yeah, and one of my matches too, it was going very well for me. However, I got stuck at 5 ink, and then I just drew an unbelievable amount of uninkables in a row. I had like the perfect hand too, if I had just had 1 more ink to get my 6 drops out, and I had a couple Ursula ready to go. But unfortunately, I drew like 3 uninkables in a row, and then that tempo loss put me out of that game just barely. But I know the friend that we went with that placed second with a Ruby Amethyst deck, he wasn't running any RLS Legacy. He had Agrabah instead. And I do think that could be a nice switch here, because then you get some inkables, and it also pushes the 2 lore, still has decent willpower of 5, and depending on the board state, that could be just as effective as these RLS legacies. I do like that you can get evasive off the legacy, but that doesn't always have as much relevance as you might think that it would. Another thing, I personally would probably cut down on the Ursula. I still like her, but I probably wouldn't play 3. I think maybe 2 at the most.
Reduce that uninkable count a little bit.
Because if that game,
and probably bump Maui to 4, I would say, would be a good thing in this current meta. And I know the deck I was playing, there's a lot of characters like Beast or Tinkerbell or Hades even, where once you turn them sideways, you just kind of cross your fingers and hope they don't have a Maui, because he just trades so efficiently against them and then isn't even removed. And then I've got to wonder, okay, how do I remove him and play some more things down to advance my game? So he's definitely an annoying thing to see, the enemy have. So but yeah, I think a 4 count of Maui is probably pretty good.
I could see that too. One issue, I guess, though, against all the Emerald Steel that I found is whenever I would crash in with the Maui and take out like a Robin Hood or a Tinkerbell, they always seem to have a way to just ping him off before I could get 2 uses out of him. So it's still nice to have that removal piece. But ideally it'd be fun to get a couple hits out of your Maui, and that just didn't really seem to happen, unfortunately. But overall, I do think Green Steel is a decent matchup for Ruby Amethyst, as long as unless you're against the discard and they have like the perfect draws. The minions in this deck should be able to take out what Emerald Steel has on the board most of the time.
So all in all, I would say with the release of Into the Inklands, like there's so many different ink pairings and decks that seem really viable in the current meta, and I'm really excited to see how that continues to evolve over the course of this expansion. And then as the weeks progress, are there any other decks that haven't even been discovered yet, that could have a lot of success? I bet there are some out there that are just waiting to be discovered and crafted. So I'm definitely going to have fun just trying to think up some new concepts that we haven't even seen yet. The challenge is, will they be viable? And who's to say? But I think there's so many more cards now to pick from, and different options and routes to build a deck with. So it's just really exciting. And already then set 4 will just be around the corner in 2 to 3 months, and then that'll just even widen the pool even more. But yeah, there's a lot more to be tested with Into the Inklands, and so this was just a fun first in-paper tournament for it. And yeah, I think also coming up will be the store championships or the set championships. So this was really good practice for something like that. I think it's really important kind of to get that in-person testing too, and figure out what decks you like to play and enjoy playing. And yeah, in a tournament setting, I mean, if a certain deck's going to take a long time to play, you might have to take that into consideration, because probably to get to the top 4, I think you need to be able to win the Stitch promo card, and top 2 for the mat. Like, yeah, I don't know
Yeah, it's not
how
a
much
great.
time you'll have to allow for draws and things like that.
It
So.
never feels great, to really grind it out for like 50 plus minutes and then both players get a draw. It definitely feels better to, secure the win or the loss, whichever one you earned in the round.
And I know for me, like this time I had a lot of rounds where like we just went to time or maybe did the 5 extra turn thing, and then after that, it's like, okay, the next round's starting up in like 2 minutes. So it was very little downtime, which I don't know. I mean, it was fine because I only played out the first 5 rounds, but it's still like it can get mentally fatiguing if you have to keep doing that and don't get much downtime in between rounds. So yeah, if you'd rather play a quicker deck, then maybe these aren't for you. But I do think they seem very effective and have great potential. And as long as you have practiced the deck and know the lines of play that you're going for, I think they can be a lot of fun and have a lot of success. So that was a look at the 2 decks we played. And again, it was a very fun event, and looking forward to doing more in-person events like that too. And hope all of you have been having fun with this new set and all the cards that came along with it. And
yeah, good luck practicing up for those Stitch playmats. I'm sure everybody would like one.
Yeah,
I would love one. I think it's going to be a challenge, but we're going to compete to the best of our ability and see if we can get a Stitch.
Should be a great time and just some exciting tournaments. And I think it's really cool that they're going to be held at just locally for people. So it's not like you have to take this huge trip or spend a lot of money on tickets to try to get to these things.
Yeah, that's really
nice. And then
nice.
it just kind of is a higher stakes local tournament. So that just adds a little fun excitement to the mix. And yeah, I think that'll be great. But yeah, let us know in the comments, like if you had to enter the set championship tomorrow, like what deck are you bringing? What have you found a lot of success with so far? I'm really curious to know.
I want to try some Amber Steel personally. That's kind of the next thing I'm going to look into.
Yeah, that seems to have a lot of potential. I know we saw that take first place at the latest big online Pixelborn tournament, and that it looked very effective. So yeah, a lot of strong decks out there, and it's just you got to prepare for them all. So yeah, with that, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, wave goodbye, Stitch.
Yep. Thanks for joining us.
Yep. Later.